the assessment format that I use in diagnosing patients and bring that into my personal relationships. And everybody who uses the formula based on the book, what it does is that it keeps you safe. It keeps you focused. It's kind of like having me in your purse or in your wallet, pointing to this and pointing to that. And were you aware of how he talked to you after your fight, or were you aware of how much she was drinking, or what about the fact that if you look at his or her family background, which is where we really learn about relationships, and you need to find out what did happen when you were growing up as a child, because unfortunately the reality is that we tend to repeat, and it's not a conscious thing, what we've learned in growing up watching mom and dad, although so many families today, over 50% of families today, are not in a situation where there is a mom and dad. So, but again, people, we become attracted, and we, very rapidly find ourselves having sex with this very attractive person, and before we know it, we may think we're in love, probably we're in lust, and we haven't looked carefully at who this person really is. And then, fast forward, might decide to get married, and then you get married, and you say, oh my God, who is it that I married? But the reality is, Nancy, is that there are always clues. Mm-hmm. There are no surprises. If Lacey Peterson, as an example, had read the book and known about the formula, I know she would be alive today. It was the same thing with Nicole Brown Simpson. Mm-hmm. I mean, these things just don't happen out of the blue. I mean, for example, domestic violence, it starts with the verbal abuse. It then escalates.
Let's talk about that dating abuse, Beatty. Let's talk about that, because you address it in your book. And how do you? Let's talk about what it is, dating abuse, and then how do you address that in your practice?
Well, all right. When people think of abuse, they think of physical abuse, and of course, physical abuse, unfortunately, is a real reality. But it's not just physical abuse. It's emotional abuse. It's verbal abuse. Does he put me down? Does she put me down? Mm-hmm. What happens if we get into an argument? How does this person behave? Does he or she slam doors, walk out, curse, drink, go to the to the track races and gamble? I mean, what is it that this person is doing when things get dicey? Because that is the only time you're really going to get to find out about who the person is and how they react to difficult situations, is when difficult situations occur. When things are nice and we say, oh, well, where are we going to go for dinner? I mean, anybody can have a good relationship if you're talking about which beach to go to or which restaurant to go to.
Sure.
But with the dating, with dating abuse and emotional and physical violence in dating situations, it typically begins with the verbal. And when somebody is being verbally disrespectful to you, you need to call them on it. Don't talk to me like that.
Yes.
You have to stop it before it starts, before it gets further. And people tend to make a lot of excuses. Well, he had a bad day, or she had a tough day. And I had a patient, I remember a few years ago, who would say to me, my husband only hits me once a year.
Oh, my
Somehow, that's okay. Well, as it turned out, this woman as a child had been hit almost every day. So for her, once a year was a vast improvement. But she wasn't aware until we really started talking about it that in healthy relationships, there's no verbal abuse, there's no emotional abuse, there's no physical abuse. I mean, all of these are deal breakers, and they have to be deal breakers right from the beginning when the behavior starts.
Now, I'm an avid reader, and I happened to read something which I thought was very interesting, that they were saying that your mate, whether you're married to them or not, is often something that you're trying to work out, that you didn't work out with one of your parents. So, for example, let's say if your husband doesn't listen to you and is always too busy for you, that could have been your father. That instead of choosing a mate that would always be there for you and would be listening to you, that instead you choose a similar, your subconscious is drawn to a relationship like that to actually work it out because it was not something that was worked out in your childhood. What do you think about that? I mean, clinical studies have been done on this.
I think it's true. It's absolutely true. And because we are attracted to, unconsciously, and we don't want to get too clinical here, to things that are familiar.
Oh, yes.
And this is where you will see a woman who grew up in a violent home very frequently ending up with a violent partner. It's what she knows. It's what he knows. And unless people are able to take that step back, Nancy, and really acknowledge, address, and resolve those issues from the past, they're going to continue to haunt you throughout your entire life. So there's unfinished business that really needs to be taken care of. But again, people have to be educated about what is a healthy relationship. Like in your intro, you were talking about a good sense of humor and respect,
yes,
and consideration. But there are many, many more things that people have to look at, like problem solving. How does my partner deal with issues? How do we deal with issues? Do we deny? Do we avoid? Do we hit the dog? Do we run out of the house? Do we self-medicate? I mean, all of these things have to be discovered so that when people say we never argue, to me, that's a bad sign, because in all relationships there are going to be differences, but you sure need to find out what happens when there are differences.
We certainly do have patterns that we go to, especially when you get angry. You do go to more of something that's more of a habit. So, for example, let's say if a woman has a history that when she gets angry, and then her history is, okay, I get angry, I'm going to walk away, I'm going to leave the room. That is most likely, without even thinking, that's what she'll do when right. she comes to when she has difficulties with her partner or with her husband or boyfriend. Now, one thing that I suggested, now obviously your book is just, it's very comprehensive, and I can't wait. I'm holding the listeners to that 10-step formula. We're going to talk about that because it's really right on the mark, and we're going to give some of those tips. Out. But here's a thought that I had, that often because we do get stuck in patterns, and then it almost replays itself out the same way. So, for example, let's say if the husband walks out because there's confrontation, and I don't want to deal with this, I'm walking out. All right, so he walks out, and maybe the woman, she tries to explain herself because that is her pattern. I'm going to defend myself, and I'm going to keep going on and on and on, trying to defend myself and get my point across. So what I suggest, which I also had an article about it on my website, is to do the opposite. To break that pattern is the guy, if the man has the pattern of walking out, he should say, come on, let's sit down. Let's talk about this. And then if the woman has the pattern of, wanting to go on and to defend herself, to say, you know what, we're not seeing eye to eye. Let's talk about this later after supper, or let's save it till tomorrow when we're both feeling a little bit more, we're not as tired from the day. Something like that. What do you think about that advice?
Well, I think it's very good advice. In taking this advice, you're assuming, and what I see typically is that people don't have this kind of self-awareness. So
yes.
Their patterns continue. Now, in a really great scenario, you would have people saying, hey, this isn't working. Whatever it is we're doing is not working. We need to try something else. But that really is expecting a great deal from people who've never viewed healthy relationships, who do not know what goes into effective problem solving, typically the patterns continue. Because if we look at marriage, 50% divorce statistic for first marriages, 60% for second, and the statistics go up for third or fourth marriages. So what does that tell us? It tells us that people aren't learning. And they're not learning because they haven't been taught. And they haven't been taught perhaps because of, their family histories, but more importantly, they're not going out and saying, hey, I'm not doing this very well, and I'm going to do whatever it is that I need to do, take courses, read books, get therapy, so that I'm in a healthy place. And unless we are in a healthy place as individuals, there is no way you're going to be able to have a healthy relationship with anybody.
Beatty, when you said people need to be a little bit more aware, it's interesting because it is something that we really all should strive to be more aware, and you have to consciously be aware to be aware. So,
Exactly.
To make, and it's interesting because how many times I've heard. Well, I can even, just one example. There's been many, but I've heard there was a gentleman. He went to a football game with his friend, and when he was gone, his wife moved everything out of the house, and she left him. He had no idea. And what does that show you? He was not aware. And it's like in your book, when people are reading through it and you're going through that 10-step formula, that you can then see that this was the signs will then start to pop out at you that I do this or I do that, and and not pointing the finger at somebody else, but things that you do that you don't even realize of what it then creates.
Exactly.
In the relationship.
I think a lot of people have been taught, consciously or not consciously, to just, bury their feelings, bury their observations. So this man who came home from the football game and his wife and everything was gone, you can be sure that the problem did not begin on that Sunday afternoon.
Yes, and he had no idea, right?
Well,
he knew that there was no problems in the relationship, and I can think of many like that when it gets to a critical point, when they get to the partner serves the divorce paper, then they panic and, okay, I'll do something. They just had no idea before that it is that lack of awareness, and it's sad because a lot of these relationships can be saved if a lot of people had the information that you're giving them to be more to create more happiness in their life, and even to choose the right person from the start.
It's true, and then you wonder about this man's wife. What did she do over the years? Did she suppress her feelings?
Yeah,
did she actually try to say, look, things aren't working for me, and unless we get help or unless things change, I don't intend to live my life like that. So was she passive? I mean, talk about passive-aggressive here. What did she do? So did she enable this unfortunate situation for years and then one day decided that she'd had enough? What kind of an act went on? I mean, people dance the dance. And we have to be sure that we're dancing the same dance with the same person and with the same steps. So, and I hear these situations also in my private practice here in Sarasota, Florida, where the person will say, I had no idea. Well, they weren't looking very hard, and their partner was not being honest in saying, look, this is not working for me, and we need to do something about it. So you have two people who were codependent for a number of years until one decided that they had enough. And it does. It takes two to tango.